Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Gamecore. So I just got this device in the mail earlier today, maybe a few hours ago. It's called the RG351MP. That's supposed to stand for Metal Pro. And as you know, it usually takes me a while to make a review video because I like to nitpick every little thing about every device. Well, in today's video, I set out to do just a quick impressions video. But if you know anything about my style, I cannot do anything quickly. So today, we're going to take a minute and just kind of figure out the whole buying experience. What it's like to unbox it, what the stock firmware is like, and what kind of potential do I see in this device. And probably an aspect that's even more important to you is I want to compare it against some of the current devices on the market today. So let's find out whether or not it's worth it compared to the RG351P, or maybe the old RG350M, which is the original metal device. Or maybe some of my current favorites, for example the RG351V, which has the same screen as the RG351MP. Or we can even try to put it toe-to-toe with my current favorite, which is the RGB10 Max. So I know that's probably overwhelming, the amount of devices I just threw in your face, but at the end of the day, I really just want to make sure that we look through all the nuances available in each of these devices, because on paper, many of them look very similar. And so I hope this video will help you with your buying decisions in the future. So without any further delay, let's just jump into it. Okay, so here we are, the RG351MP. This is using that old style Anbernic box, not like the new one that came with the RG300X. And I bet that has to do with the fact that this device had been delayed for several months due to the chip shortage. Either way, let's open it up and see what's inside. So it comes with a USB-C cable for charging, and like always, it's a very cheap cable. So if you have something better, I would use that. It also comes with a Wi-Fi dongle and OTG adapter, so you can connect to the internet. It's unfortunate that it doesn't have Wi-Fi internally. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It also comes with a glass screen protector and some instructions as well. We'll just leave those in the box. Okay, moment of truth here. As you can see, I got the blue one and it looks gorgeous. They're calling this color ocean blue, but there's also a mint green as well as a matte black version. I like this one the best. It's probably the best looking metal device I've seen come from Anbernic. Like with their other metal devices, the build quality on this is extremely good. The amount of craftsmanship here really does feel almost like an Apple product. Up top you have your two USB-C ports and not much else. This MP model actually supports two SD cards here, one for the firmware and another for your games. And on the back they have their two trademark rubber pads. These pads feel a little bit grittier than some of the previous models. If you look at the RG351M, so the Unpro model if you will, this one's laid out differently. The power button's on the left side and it has a volume wheel on the right. It also has plastic sides to allow for internal Wi-Fi. This one has volume buttons on the left and a power button on the right, which is exactly the same as the RG350M, which is the previous generation of devices. This came out in May of 2020. But as you can see, the 351MP and the 350M are nearly identical. The only thing that's different is the I/O up top. The 350M had HDMI out, and the audio jacks are not quite centered. But other than that, it looks like they used the exact same shell. Which got me thinking, the RG350P, the plastic version, has the same shell as well. So it might be possible to mod this board and put it inside the plastic case instead. Obviously the HDMI and headphone jack don't line up, so that'll require a little bit of work, but it's something I'm interested in trying out. But yeah, overall, the craftsmanship is really nice on this. It's a really good feeling device. This is a tried and true design at this point. For better or for worse. For example, I'm not a fan of these shoulder buttons. I really wish at some point these devices would evolve to allow for stacked shoulder buttons, like you find on the Retroid Pocket 2 or the Nintendo Switch. The front buttons feel really good. The D-pad has a really nice amount of pivot, and all these buttons have a membrane mushiness to them. Like with all the other Anbernic devices, they feel a lot like classic handheld systems. The D-pad also has a fair amount of travel, so I think it's going to be easy to do diagonals on this. And the face buttons feel good. I've always felt that these buttons are a little bit small, they're about 8mm, but they still function just fine. The analog sticks are the same standard Switch style sticks that you find in many of these other devices. The shoulder buttons are the only buttons on this device that are clicky. Okay, let's boot it up and see how long it takes. I'm going to speed it up here just so we're not sitting around for 30 seconds staring at each other, but as you can see it takes about 26 seconds altogether to boot up. Now if you don't want to wait that long, there's always the sleep function, we'll talk more about that later. And yeah, this is the stock firmware operating system. This is the exact same firmware that they've been using since the RG351P revision that came out around October-November of last year. And unfortunately, this Emulec 3.8 has been left behind in the dust when it comes to Emulec itself and custom firmwares. So it's really unfortunate that the company has not taken any measures to upgrade this firmware over time, but at the end of the day, I'm not too worried about it because the community will take care of the rest. More on that later. So let's test out the Wi-Fi dongle and make sure that it works. And yeah, sure enough, I can see the different Wi-Fi networks nearby, so it works. And it connected no problem. So now let's talk about weight. This weighs 271 grams. That's the exact same weight as the RG351M, and a little bit heavier than the RG350M. Now granted, a plastic device is going to be much lighter. You can see the RG351P is about 189 grams, and even the RGB10 Max with a 5-inch screen is 219 grams. The RG351V, which is a very large device, is still 230 grams, so comparatively it's not as heavy as the RG351MP. So at 271 grams, this is a heavy device, but no heavier than the other metal models that are available from Anbernic. If you want a really heavy model, you would have to look at something like the Metal Odra Go Super, which clocks in at over 400 grams. Okay, so now let's talk about screen comparison. Here are the different models that I want to compare it against. In general, I've found that the RG351MP is a little bit brighter than the RG351V, even though the displays are very, very similar. It also feels more saturated than the RG350M. The colors just seem to pop a little bit more. Now on the bottom right, the RGB10 Max has the most color saturation, but is also the least bright out of all the displays, and this is even after doing a kernel fix to increase the brightness. Now that being said, all of these displays are much better than the RG351P and the RG351M. Not only are these screens a lower resolution, but the color balance is all off. As you can see here, the characters have a little bit of a greenish tint to them. Compare that to the RG351MP, and the display just feels a little bit more warm and rich. But the 640 by 480 display on this device is not quite perfect, and a lot of that has to do with the pixel scaling you have to do to fill up the screen on this device. For example, let's look at the distorted life bar in Mega Man X. If we go into the RetroArch settings and we turn on integer scaling, you can see here that it actually fixes Mega Man's life bar. There's no more large black bars in there. But you lose out on a little bit of screen real estate. Now you can actually fix this by going into the settings, turning off integer scaling, and then adding a shader. For example, this one here, Sharp Bilinear 2x Prescale, will give you a full screen Super Nintendo experience with an approximation of integer scaling, but it does soften the image just slightly. It's going to be up to you what you prefer to use. If you want super sharp and square pixels, you're going to have to deal with integer scaling, which will give you a bit of a smaller screen. Or you can blow up the screen to full size and use a shader, but you're going to have to deal with a softer image. Unfortunately, you cannot have both. But all the same, this 4x3 screen is just about perfect. The colors are rich, it's nice and bright, and the panel is OCA laminated, which means it'll look great at various angles and lighting conditions. Okay, so now let's talk about how these devices feel in the hand. The RG351MP does feel nice and balanced. It's definitely a weighty feel, it's a significant device to hold in your hands. By contrast, the RG351P is a much thinner device and also lighter. Now there's some advantages to that. For example, it's easier to get to the L2 and R2 buttons. That being said, some people think it's too thin. They call it a chocolate bar. In my opinion, the RGB10 Max is a perfect balance because it's tall, much like the RG351MP, but also has a nice wideness to it, and because it's a plastic device, it's also fairly light for its size. When it comes down to it, the RG351MP is exactly like holding the RG350M. And thanks to the metal shell, it has a premium feel to it as well. Now easily the worst of the bunch is going to be the RG351V. While this vertical orientation is nice to look at, it's actually not very fun to hold. It's not very ergonomic. I can really only play this thing for about 10, maybe 20 minutes at a time. And of course it has other shortcomings like a single analog stick and a mono speaker. Those are things you're not going to have to worry about with the RG351MP. So in terms of feel, I prefer the RGB10 Max the best, then these two here in the middle, then the RG351P, and finally the RG351V. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the sound quality of the speakers. This is something I noticed immediately when first starting the device. So I'm going to crank up the volume to max, and you're going to hear that there's some distortion. Also, you can't hold down on these buttons, you have to just push them a bunch of times. Kind of annoying. So I'm not sure if you can hear it, but there's definitely distortion coming from Mario jumping. Let's compare that to the RG350M at max volume. Now the RGB10 Max, which has a mono speaker and is the quietest of all the devices. Now the RG351V. And finally the RG351P. To me, this one actually has the best sound out of all of them. So what I think they did with this RG351MP is they either used new speakers, or in the software they're overdriving the current speakers. Either way, it doesn't sound good, but I'm hoping that custom firmware can resolve this issue. So in terms of sound, RG351P is the best, then the 350M, then the 351MP, then the V, and finally the RGB10 Max. So going back to the subject of software, let's talk a little bit about the firmware card that comes with this device. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the firmware because I do expect that we'll have custom firmware soon, but let me show you some of the things that annoy me about it. For example, if you go into the Sega Genesis folder, and say you boot one of these up, you're going to find that it actually boots up the Game Gear games within the Genesis folder. And it's as simple as the fact that Anbernic put in the wrong games in the wrong folder. To get out of a game, you press L3 and R3 together, and then within this menu, just quit RetroArch. Now let's go into the Game Gear section and see what they have in here. And within here, they have Master System games, so a completely different console. The only reason these are actually even booting is because they all use the same RetroArch core. Luckily, within the Mega Drive folder, you actually have the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive games. But either way, that's going to be very confusing for someone who's just getting this device and trying to figure out how to play their favorite game. Now in terms of favorite game, a lot of them are actually not going to be on the 64GB card that comes with this device. For example, browsing through the Super Nintendo list, you won't find some of the classics like Star Fox or Super Mario World or Mario World 2, Mario RPG. A lot of your favorites are going to be completely absent from this catalog, despite having 183 Super Nintendo games on here. And even the games that are on here have issues. For example, the Donkey Kong Country that they loaded is actually like the competition cartridge, so it only runs for 5 minutes at a time. Now honestly, in a perfect world, they wouldn't put any of these ROMs on here and we would build our own ROM libraries. But all the same, I do find it very lazy that they're still using the same image from a year ago. The configurations are set up very inconsistently. For example, Game Boy Advance has been stretched out to 4:3 resolution. The Game Boy Advance originally had a 3:2 aspect ratio, so what you would find on the RG351P or M. Now it's easy enough to go into RetroArch and change those settings, and you have to do the same thing like you do with the Super Nintendo. You need to turn off integer scaling, and then add that sharp bilinear shader. And honestly, Game Boy Advance doesn't look too bad here. You have some black bars on the top and bottom, but overall it plays these games well. Same thing with PSP, they stretch it to full size, which really just kind of hurts my brain to look at. So this is a fairly easy fix too. You just go into the settings and then change the scaling to auto scaling. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about performance when it comes to some of these heavier duty systems because I'm going to wait for custom firmware first. So I'll do a full RG351MP review once this device has the same performance as other devices in the same chipset. For now, I would just say maybe look at some of the other device reviews I've done with this chipset, which is the RK3326. And you'll find, in general, PSP, Dreamcast, Nintendo 64 will only play about half their catalogs at full speed. Again, Dreamcast has also been set up incorrectly. They have the resolution set to 320 by 240, so a low resolution. Changing it to 640 by 480 does make it look better, but it also creates a little bit of a dip in performance. Now this stock firmware just doesn't have the most updated emulators available, so in general things like Nintendo 64 just look kind of terrible. This one's using the parallel RetroArch core, and you can see the lighting is all weird, like this girl's head is super bright, and there's a good amount of glitches that are happening as well. Okay, I've done enough talking smack about the stock firmware, let's change this to a more positive note. And we'll start with a cat break. Now, these cat breaks have been kind of rare lately, and that's because it's just too hot in this house. Chicken doesn't like jumping on my lap when I'm working here in this room. But she decided to grace us with her presence, so everyone say hello to Chicken. She's saying hello back. Okay, let's get back to the RG351MP. I know I just teased you with a bunch of Crash Bash footage here, but let's try some other games. If we're only talking about the stock firmware, then I would say that PS1 is probably the best looking system on this device. It scales perfectly to this screen, and performance is out of the park. Every game is going to play at full speed. Now PS1 plays on a lot of different systems, but this one definitely plays really well. Now let's talk a little bit about custom firmware. I threw in the firmware cards for my RG351V, and they all boot, but the kernel needs to be updated. So ArcOS and 351elec will both boot into the main screen, but it won't detect any of the buttons. But either way, that's actually a really great sign. For the RG351V, Anbernic released the source code to the developers, and they were able to get custom firmware working basically overnight. And so I'm hoping the same will happen here. Not only that, it appears they've made some good changes to the control configuration of the device itself. One of the main issues with the other RG351 devices is that they use a USB controller, and that controller does not work well with non-RetroArch cores. So for example, if you take the Nintendo DS emulator, Drastic, and you put the device into sleep, when you wake the device up again, none of the controls are going to work. And this was one of the main reasons why the developer of ArcOS stopped working on these devices, because it was super frustrating to not be able to jump in and out of your games. Well, I'm happy to report that it appears that they're using GPIO controls for this device. So if I put the device into sleep using the same emulator, and then bring it back up, the controls work instantly and perfectly. I'll even demonstrate it twice just to show you that it works. So that's a great sign and a really nice step forward. So let's do a quick teardown and see what's under the hood in this device. So right off the bat, one of the first things I notice is that the board is dated for March 30th of this year. That means that this production board was developed about 2 weeks after the RG351V was released. And I've been told that because of the chip shortage, that's why production had been delayed. The company had also said something about Wi-Fi chips not being recently available, but if you look at this board, which is dated for over 6 months ago, it doesn't have a spot for a Wi-Fi chip, which leads me to hypothesize that they probably didn't plan on putting internal Wi-Fi on this device at all. And the fact that they're using an all-metal shell is also an indicator that Wi-Fi wasn't a priority. And that's kind of a bummer, because custom firmware like ArcOS has over-the-air updates, which makes it very easy to update your firmware. On top of that, things like retro achievements are really handy, as well as the ability to net play with your friends. Now all of this can be done with the external Wi-Fi dongle that comes in the box, but it would have been really nice to have it internally as well, especially since most of the more recent devices with this chipset have been shipping with internal Wi-Fi. Personally, I don't think it's the end of the world, but it is a glaring omission to leave out a very fundamental feature on something that you're calling a pro device. And last note here is they've upgraded the battery to 3500 milliamp hours, so the same size as the one in the RG351V. Okay, final thing to show off here is that even after having this device for just a few hours, I noticed a little chip in the paint. And I tend to baby my devices, so the fact that this happened is kind of alarming to me. I'm a little worried to see what the shell of this device is going to look like 6 months from now. Alright everyone, let's start wrapping up this impressions video. Like I said before, I'm going to do a full review once we have custom firmware available on this device. For now, I just wanted to talk about whether this device is going to be worth a potential purchase. When it comes to RK3326 devices, this is almost a pinnacle device. It's really well crafted, the D-pad is excellent, the buttons are really good, it has dual analog sticks, stereo speakers, 4x3 display, 640x480 resolution. It has nearly all the things that I would hope for in a device. Personally, I prefer plastic devices, but if you want that premium feel, this metal device feels really great. But one of the questions I get a lot is if you already have an RK3326 device, is it worth the upgrade? So let's say you have an RG351P or an RG351M. These devices have a lower screen resolution, and so if you're looking for a higher resolution, then yeah, I think it might be worth it. I'm not sure it's worth $150 to upgrade to have a better screen, but maybe you could give this old one away as a gift, or maybe even sell it to recoup a little bit of those costs. In those contexts, yeah, I think it might be worth the upgrade. Now say you bought the RG351V because you really wanted that 4x3 display, but you do find it a little uncomfortable, or maybe you missed the dual analog sticks or the stereo speakers. It's going to be the same thing here. If the ergonomics really bother you, then yeah, it might be worth upgrading. Because for all intents and purposes, as nice as this screen is, it's clearly not a comfortable device. And so it's really just going to be up to you whether or not that's worth that additional cost. Now maybe you already own the RG350M or you're considering buying this one instead. And I gotta say, for PS1 and below gameplay, this is still a really great device. And the Atom software image that was recently released for this just makes it all that much better. I would say if you're interested in getting a metal device and you want a nice screen, and you're okay with playing PlayStation and below games, this is going to be your main competition with the RG351MP. If you can grab this thing on sale, say for $100 or less, then I think this would be worth it more than paying $150 for the RG351MP. But in the end, as much as I like this RG351MP, it doesn't dethrone my current favorite device within this chipset, which is the Powkiddy RGB10 Max. I really love this 5-inch screen, it gives you a lot of versatility, and it's a really nice lightweight device considering its size. So despite the fact that this has a mono speaker, this is still my favorite device that uses the RK3326 chipset. So in the end, my thoughts on this device are a little bit conflicted. Of all the devices with 3.5-inch screens, this is clearly the best one. It can run all of your classic systems, and even quite a few PSP, Nintendo 64, and Dreamcast games. And the metal shell does feel nice and premium. But at a retail price of $150, it feels like they're almost charging next generation prices for what will soon become a previous generation device. I think that if this device had come out in March when it was first planned, this device would have dominated the market. But at this point, with next generation devices like the Ein Odin, the rumored Retroid Pocket 3, as well as Anbernic's own next device, the RG552, I'm just not quite sure that this device has been worth the wait. So if you're looking to make your very first purchase, this is a very solid choice. But unless you like to collect these handheld devices, or you have serious issues with your current device, say with the screen resolution or the ergonomics, then I'm not quite sure it's worth the upgrade. Anyway, I'll share more thoughts when I do the actual review, but for now, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.